Welcome, everybody, to the season finale of Digging Deeper. I am the face, voice, and spirit of Randall Reilly Marketing, apparently. We brought back all of our experts that appeared on any show this season so that we could summarize all the great learning and insights of this season. Of course, for you return visitors, you know we will start the episode here in about 2 or 3 minutes. My screen will go black, or your screen will go black. We'll all turn off our cameras and then the show will start. It's a really fun episode. We're just recapping our favorite moments of the season, and then we will take a Q&A from this expert panel you have before you. I will say we're only covering 5 moments from the season. I think there are 8 or 9 episodes. Feel free to ask any question you want. This is the best panel of experts that we've ever had on Digging Deeper together. So you can take the Q&A in any direction you want to go, within reason, of course. But feel free to ask. I will be fielding the questions. If you ask a question, I don't get to it, just ask it again. Just keep asking till I ask it to the panel. And we'll honestly have a little bit of discussion on our own, some questions that I have queued up to go through. But I think you guys are going to get a lot of value out of this. I will start the episode, the recap, here in about 3 minutes. To the panel, if your episode was not picked, please don't get your feelings hurt. I'm sorry.
I already know mine wasn't picked.
We can only pick 5. And of course, I picked the episode where I talked to myself. So
I'm just not. Why wasn't mine first? Why did Flip get first? Come on.
You were second.
Yeah. Was that first loser, Kyle?
I'm surprised.
I gave. Well, I don't.
I'm surprised the top 5.
I'm already spoiling.
I'm already the top 5 moments aren't.
2 minutes. We'll start the episode in 2 minutes. Looks like
I'm surprised, David.
That's good. What's that?
I'm surprised the top 5 moments from this season aren't just 5 random
5 from my episode?
moments from your episode.
Actually, it would be great. He brought in
The top 5 moments of all season came from one episode.
and comment on how great he did and how much better he was than all of our episodes.
Watch and learn.
Hey, when you're good, you're good. When you're good, you're good. All right, to our attendees, we will be starting the episode here in about 2 minutes. Go ahead, if you have any questions, write them down. We really do. We have, between Emily and Steve, how many years of experience in recruiting?
Just shy of 100, I think.
Just shy of 100 years of experience. Maldonado has another, how many years of experience in
100 as well for himself.
100 just by himself.
If we're talking true trucking, man, that's like 5 to 1.
Yeah, that's true. In trucking years, 1,000. Seth has had another 2,000 years in trucking. We have a lot of expert marketers, a lot of expert data analysts. I can't talk. But go ahead. If you have questions, write them down. We're going to go ahead. It is now time. We're going to start this episode. So if you guys want to go ahead and turn off your cameras, I'll be turning off mine, and we will start this episode.
Well, hey everybody. You probably have a few questions. You're like, why is it just Dave? Is another Dave gonna walk in? Are they gonna talk about TikTok? Well, you're in luck. It's the season finale of Digging Deeper, and we're gonna do the same thing we did last year. I'm gonna walk through all of my favorite moments from the year. Hope you're ready. Starting with number 5. Dave bums us all out. Use emotions, preferably negative ones. You see, humans like to think of ourselves as really logical, rational decision makers, but research reveals that the vast majority of us are all emotional decision makers. We actually only use logic to justify the decisions that we've made. And if we think about drivers in general, drivers are very emotional beings by and large. I mean, when they leave a job, is that a very thought out decision, or is that usually a very emotional decision? So you can bet that when they're trying to take a job, that's a very emotional decision. The things that make them click an ad, these are all emotional decisions. So we need to use that emotion in how we construct campaigns, how our recruiters talk. Think about Seth on Seth Listens In, another great show, not as good as this one, but another great show. He's always talking about building rapport, uncovering motivations. That's really just discovering the emotion within the conversation. Emotion makes us take action. The reason I chose this one in particular is because I think so often in recruiting, we get way too stuck into this idea of, I gotta highlight all the features and benefits, and we never really consider the emotion that makes drivers make decisions. And we know from research that we need to be highlighting the negative things they're moving away from and not the positive things they're moving towards. We learned a lot of things throughout the season. One is that I put my eyebrows too low often, and if I sit back, I'm really boring. So here I am sitting up, giving you number 4. Number 4, McKensie finds all of your missing leads.
My biggest takeaway was we could be losing leads because of our own processes. So our processes aren't smooth, they're not clear. Maybe our when someone calls in and tries to connect to a recruiter, maybe they get hung up on, things like that. So the biggest way we can lose less leads is by periodically walking through our own processes. So acting like we're a driver, filling out a lead, looking for an ad, talking to a recruiter, just going through what the process would look like if we're a driver, and just taking a good hard look at what might we be doing that's pushing drivers away.
The reason I chose this particular clip is it really highlights, sorry, I guess I wasn't looking at the camera too well. It really highlights this idea of you have to constantly audit your process. And if you're not looking closely into your processes, there's no telling how many qualified drivers you could just be losing along the way. And that brings us to number 3. Number 3 is Seth gets all efficient with us. So on this one, we rehash the efficiency formula. We talk about it all the time, but I think every fleet needs to revisit this idea at least every 3 months. The whole idea here being that, look, there's a lot of things you could fix in your recruiting pipeline, but there is one that will make the biggest difference, and that's the phone call. If we were to take all those areas and say, what is the one area of improvement that would have the most profound impact on any part of how many drivers we bring in, the answer, and I'll let Seth give the punchline since it's his punchline. What's the punchline?
It is the step where we're scheduling them for orientation, committing them to come work with us.
Right. And how much more profound of an effect on average would that have for a fleet than the other areas?
You can actually do the math on it. I don't know off the top of my head. If you
go
assign,
to the website, do the math.
Yeah, 5 percentage points to each step,
Right.
and you just crunch the numbers. I mean, it's amazing how many hires it adds at the end.
Yeah, I think when I did the math using kind of like stock numbers for that would kind of resonate with most fleets. I think it was like, if you could bump up how many people you were qualified drivers that you talked to, if you could bump up that number that you scheduled for orientation, you can bump that number up by 5%.
Mm-hmm.
Compared that to 5% in every other area, it was like 3 to 4 times the effect of every other area.
Yeah.
Not that we shouldn't be fixing the other areas, but
Sure.
just know, I think you can say for most people, your biggest area for improvement to bring in more drivers would be essentially the phone call. It's
conversation.
It's how you're talking to drivers. And now we're here to number 2. This came from the same episode. Scott Maldonado took the time to show us how directors of recruiting can have real blind spots when it comes to the conversations their recruiters are having.
Okay, I'll speak on that firsthand.
Okay.
So I led and worked with the carrier for close to 20 years, and we had 68 recruiters, and I could actually hear them on the floor when I'm walking on the floor, and I knew they were just doing great. I just knew it in my heart.
Right.
I could hear them on the phone. I couldn't hear the actual driver on the other end of the phone, but I just knew I had the best working with us, and we did. We had some top line recruiters out there. But after I started listening to phone calls, and this was years ago, it really was, how do I say, jaw dropping, because I realized that we really weren't. They were practicing doing the same thing over every day, but we weren't adjusting our shot group. We weren't truly adjusting how we were approaching every single call and doing it differently. So we couldn't coach to it.
Right.
I was just listening to one side of the call. And the problem is it's so time consuming, David.
Mm-hmm. But I will add, based off the math, it's probably the most important thing you could be spending time on.
There's no doubt about it. But when I go back to the time consuming part and why most folks don't do it, or why I didn't do it 20 years ago, is because it ate up so much of my time.
Oh yeah.
Right, because you have to listen to the calls. It's really easy to hit a button and measure the number of calls a recruiter makes.
Right.
It's so much more challenging to actually listen to the call and coach to it.
The reason I chose this is because it's so easy to just kind of walk the floor, as Scott says, and just think, I think I'm hearing good conversations, but until you dig into the nitty gritty of each conversation, you're never going to find the key points of improvement. And now, the moment you've all been waiting for, my Dave, the one Dave of Digging Deeper, my favorite moment from season 2. Zack Flippo gets serial about branding.
When you do branding well, you've created some sort of advocacy for your company and they know who you are. They already like you. I like to give the example of when I go down a cereal aisle, there's a lot of different options for cereal.
A lot of different fleets you could work for.
So I'm a Cinnamon Toast Crunch guy. It's absolutely phenomenal.
Not
It's God's gift to America.
Not Golden Grams?
Not Golden Grams. So the idea is I can go down a cereal aisle and shop, but I have a lot of choices. The goal for branding is let me make it to where a driver goes down the cereal aisle and they're not shopping. They already know what they want.
I really like this metaphor.
They're coming to me.
It's a really good answer.
And I don't even eat cereal, but I like this metaphor. This is really good.
Yeah.
I'm not even being facetious.
It's hard for me to gauge sometimes.
You're not being facetious that you don't eat cereal?
I don't eat cereal, and this is it. The idea there, and I probably shouldn't have interrupted your flow because it's so good. If like drivers are going down the aisle, you don't want them shopping, and that's so like this is what branding is about. Is I'm going down the aisle, but I'm not shopping. I'm looking for the thing that I want.
So now put it in our client's world.
Yes.
What if they go to Google, or what if they go to Indeed, and instead of putting truck driving jobs near me and get a menu of items that they can look at and
an
compare,
aisle to shop down,
fill out their form 9 different times and get contacted by 9 different recruiters at worst, right? So like instead of that, what if in a world the driver goes to Google and they're not searching for a job and they're searching for your job? Your competition goes down to 0.
So Zack came up with this great idea about how to consider branding, how to frame your perspective around branding. And he talked about when people go grocery shopping, you don't want them in the cereal aisle looking all the different cereals. You want them walking into that store with your brand written down on their grocery list. And that is my favorite moment from season 2 of Digging Deeper. On a serious note, thank you so much for all your participation and all your views and time that you've given to us here on Digging Deeper. We always want to give you guys the best content we can. And of course, even though this is the end of season 2, we'll be back for season 3 with more great content and great guests.
All right, guest, if you'll turn on your webcams. We're back.
Hey, congrats on getting season 3 picked up.
You never know. You never know where it's going to go. All right, if you have questions, go ahead and start sending them in. We already have a few questions. Julie, you have been, so Julie is our Senior Vice President of Strategy and Marketing, and she runs our driver advisory board and executes a lot of different polls to our Truckers News audience. What would you say is the biggest takeaway that you've had in all of this research and anecdotes that you've been receiving from drivers? You're muted.
I would say now that I'm not muted again, it's about, I love the way one driver put it, but it comes up again and again in the interviews, the polls, the surveys, everything. He said, I stay with my fleet because they consistently do the little things well. It's about being predictable. It's about being reliable. You don't need to have the best pay, but it needs to be simple, understandable. I mean, you have the best pay, but being consistent with it and letting them know what to expect and then delivering after you've set that expectation. If you tell them they're going to be home at a certain time, get them home at a certain time, no matter what. If their truck is going to be fixed at a certain time, better be ready at that time. Consistently having driver managers and fleet managers treat them with respect. Shop people treating them with respect. It's doing those little things well over and over and over again. Stands out so much to a driver and drives so much of your reputation. There was another driver that was recommending fleet to someone else, and they said, I won't name the actual. I said, look, they may not pay the best, never screw you over, and that means a lot.
Thank you, Julie. We got another question. I think it's for you, Baldonado. It says you talked about making sure you're hearing both sides of the phone call, which is a very time-consuming thing. They say, like, what is the cadence, or how often should you be checking into that and listening to the full phone call of your recruiters?
Absolutely, that's a great question. I think there's stages to it, guys, and our answers aren't pre-scripted either. I mean, he just threw that question at me, so I'm gonna give you what I would do if I was leading a team. I would start off with my leaders and coaching them on how to coach a call. That's the first step, because you have your directors, your VPs, and most people have managers that work with them, and so I would coach them to listen to calls. And you're going to also want to pick calls that are over 5 minutes. Don't go in and listen to 2 to 3 minute calls, because we know those aren't going to be great calls, or they might not be answered. So it all determines the length of the call. Coach, your managers do it. You're doing probably 5 calls. I'm just throwing that number out there, 5 calls per recruiter per week, right? And then you want to transition it, because it is time consuming, over to where you do peer call coaching. So for an example, I got Kyle, he coaches all the recruiters. He's got 5 calls per recruiter. He does that. And after about 2 to 3 weeks, you get both recruiters to peer co-coach each other. But most of the time, most of the time, right? We don't do that. We take it all in our hands, and then we don't do it. We let it fall to the wayside. So I'd say about 5 calls a week per driver recruiter.
This one I think is for McKensie. It says you talk about losing leads by not auditing your process, or kind of going through it and finding all the ways. Can you give a few examples of things that you would discover when you go through your process that might be causing you to lose leads?
Yep, absolutely. One great example was a fleet that I worked with that could not understand why they had an extremely high missed call percentage. It was something in like the 80% range, very high. And we were finally like, let's go through it. Let's just call one of the numbers. Let's see how this process works. And what we found is that one of the transfer numbers was going to just like a dead end. It wasn't being routed correctly to the fleet. And so every single phone call that was going to that transfer number was getting missed. It was not getting answered. And unless we had taken the time to sit and call all of the numbers, act like we were a driver, sit on hold, see when the call got disconnected, we would have never noticed that that transfer number was never making it all the way through to a recruiter.
Thank you, McKenzie. I think this would be a great question for Emily. It says, the process for how we bring in drivers has changed a lot over the last few years, especially with, COVID, pandemic, orientations becoming online, that sort of thing. What are the biggest, this says, what are the biggest updates to the process that fleets need to be aware of?
I don't know if it's an update or just the best practice.
Technological and just changes in the driver and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think there's the human nature of it, right? We all went through a bunch of changes, and we had a lot of things that we had to consider during COVID, but also it's taking time to slow down to speed up, right? To make sure you're asking questions, you're advising, your process is predictable. It's something that virtually translates. So do you have it written down so they can see it? Some people need to see a picture. Some people need the words. Some people need an extra coach. We've layered in some candidate concierge people, so who are just working from that time between accept to showing up to orientation to answer questions and keep them engaged. I think it's much about, Scott Maldonado referenced this before, right? You got a constant contact, keeping up, measuring it, seeing how those calls sound to somebody else. And even McKenzie said it, it's testing the numbers, making sure you inspect what you expect from your process. So I think it's the diligence along with the humanization that are all important.
Thank you, Emily. Here's a question. Zach, it says, you talk about branding, using branding to keep drivers from quote unquote shopping. Can you give us a little more detail on what that looks like? Like, what does that mean to use branding in that capacity?
Yeah, for sure. I think a large piece of it is, think about when a driver is considering a new job, right? So what do they think first? When I think of a new job, what are they doing? Probably 5 to 10 companies come to mind right off the bat, and they may go try and look up those opportunities. Question is your name in one of those 5 or 10? If it's not, bad news. Like you're not even in the game yet. You can't win if you're not in the game. So the goal of branding is, how do I put my name, my video, my brand, my opportunity in front of the drivers, so much to where it's kind of a fine line between, I don't want to just kill them with ads to where I'm just annoying them, but I absolutely want my brand name to be top of mind, so that when they do go to search for a job, they're not just, like I said in the piece, right? They're not just looking for any job. You're already top of mind. They already know who you are. They already are interested in you. Now they're just getting more information on what your job looks like specifically.
All right, thank you, Zach. I'm going to throw this question to, but I think Julie may have some input. Everybody can have input. Feel free to step in at this point. This says, what are the differences when talking to more old school veteran drivers versus newer drivers that are just entering the industry? How would you, what are the biggest differences, I guess is what they're asking.
So you're asking me this question?
Steve, I want Steve to take this one.
Okay.
But jump in if you want, Julie.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. I think at the end of the day, there's some differences, but at the end of the day, I think being able to just treat drivers like they're people and they're not a commodity is a big component. So when you've got some of the older school drivers who are worried about pay, and they're worried about riders and all of the different things that come along to it. But at the end of the day, they all want to be treated well. They want to be treated like a person, not just a commodity. So if you just circle back to the motivations of a newer driver, they're all about the company and kind of the reputation. They want to be part of a bigger initiative than just hiring drivers. They want that social responsibility that goes with it. But at the end of the day, they're people that want to be treated like people and not just move from truck to truck or commodity to commodity.
Well, and I would add to this, one of the things I've talked to some of the super experienced drivers, like I was talking to Maldonado about this last night, actually, about that unicorn guy who'd been in the same fleet for 15 years. He's a driver everybody wants. And he was like, I used to complain all the time about these youngsters. They're like, oh, they won't throw freight. When I was their age, I was throwing freight all the time, and I was out 3 weeks at a time, chugging coffee, fixing my truck myself, and never stopped for anything. And these kids these days won't do any of that. And I said, well, do you still do that? He's like, well, no, of course not. I do. But it was kind of funny. He said, I used to complain about the kids, and he said that they were weaker than us, but I actually think they're just smarter than we are. But the communities, you've got the experienced drivers who feel like they've paid their dues and they want the easier jobs. And the younger people are coming in saying like, well, we want the same thing. We don't want to put up with that. So there's actually not as much difference as you would think.
Let me touch on that if that's okay as well. Okay, and I know we're short for time, but it also, a lot of it has to do as well with who the recruiter is, because you're building rapport and connecting with the individual. And I just left a major carrier that was with them all week. They know who they are. They're probably on this, and they're hiring for their academy. So they brought in a recruiter, right? That was an ex-driver who's driven for 30 years to recruit for the academy, right? Consider that people going through the academy and their age demographics, they're going to have a different conversation. So they don't care as much about, or is not as important what an experienced driver's worried about or wants, right? And then when you talk about a rehire versus a new hire, that conversation is completely different. Because I'm trying to hire Emily onto my trucking company, I'm going to tell her all the great things that we do and how we're going to make her life great. If I'm trying to rehire Emily, I'm taught that conversation is how we changed. what have we done to change? Right.
Yeah, I think, Scott, it goes back to ultimately every conversation can't be scripted, right? You have to have the concepts and the parameters to give people the information the way they need to hear it and what's important to them. So a good recruiter is going to ask more questions than talk, right? And then they're going to respond in a way because they're empowered to have that knowledge. If you think about traditionally newer in role, people want training. They want to know what they don't know. They want somebody to guide them and say, what questions am I not asking that I should have asked you? And that's where you become a trusted advisor versus a vending machine for candidates. And that's the distinction I think we look for as well.
Solid. A doozy of a question. And I'm going to throw this one to Seth because he's been over there biding his time. So it says, I know it is about quantity of the call, but how long should a typical recruiting call last on average? I have one recruiter that spends 3 to 5 minutes on the phone with applicants and brings in a lot of drivers, but they do not stay very long. My other recruiter talks for 20 minutes, but does not bring on as many candidates.
Interesting. So we've actually looked at the number side of this, right, which is only part of the story, but we did find a correlation of sorts that says the longer the call was, the more likely they were to get hired. Okay, so there's something to be said that there's some type of correlation, and McKensie will probably beat me up about the wording I'm using here of correlation. And anyway, she can correct this afterwards, but it's a balance, right? If you're talking just to talk and we're not really getting anywhere, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But if it's a productive conversation and we're going about it the right way, showing a genuine interest in the driver, what they're looking for, putting a plan together that works for them, I don't think there's a specific number of minutes a call needs to be. It's more about the conversation itself, right? Was it a good conversation? So I would say whatever's working for that recruiter. Now, if one recruiter's having a ton of conversations, hiring a lot of drivers, and those drivers are leaving, there's probably some coaching that could be done there about, are we setting the right expectations? Did we ask the right questions? And if it's a 20 to 30 minute phone call, also worth listening to say, are we just chit chatting, which might be okay, right? If it's building relationship, but there's a job to be done, right? And we gotta keep moving forward because it's a numbers game too, right? Don't treat them like a number, but get your numbers up, right? So I'm sure Scott has some thoughts on that as well. I can see him, his wheels are turning, his gears moving.
Well, before we go to Scott, I think Kyle, I know he's been digging into a lot of data on, how to best utilize recruiters' times. And so I'd like to get a little bit of his, don't spoil anything, but let's get a little bit of your thoughts on just how to best use recruiters' time.
Yeah, I think to kind of echo some of what Seth and Scott and everybody has said, it is truly finding what's that sweet spot and maximizing what's a limited number of minutes for each and every recruiter each week. So it's just making sure they're doing the things that you want them to do that add the most value to getting that driver hired. And then to Seth's point and kind of the question as well, making sure that they're setting those right expectations in that. So there's a lot of work that can be done, but do you have the right people doing the specific right things to make a pointed difference in your recruiting flow? So that's quite simply, if I could just summarize it and then I'll shut up, just let the people that are good at doing something do the thing they're good at doing and get out of their way. Let them kind of specialize, and that can make a huge difference. That can be more than your 5%. That can help you with your communication problems. That can help you with getting to the right call duration and all those important metrics as well.
Scott, let me hear your thoughts on that last question.
This is almost like that hot wing contest, dude. I forgot the question.
The question was, they had one recruiter, their phone calls were like 3 to 5 minutes. They could get drivers scheduled for orientation, but the drivers that they did hire did not stay very long. And they have another recruiter whose calls would last 20 minutes and they would not bring on as many drivers. She didn't say that those drivers stayed longer, the 20-minute phone call guy, but I kind of inferred that I think the 20-minute phone call guy's drivers stayed longer.
So here's what I found out of my experience, guys. And again, this is not gospel, but you're going to have your 3 buckets. You're going to have your recruiters that have those 2 and 3 minute calls, and that's really 45 minutes in your IVR. So it's really a minute and a half call, right? Those drivers are not going to stick because you did not build rapport and connect with them. You have to measure all the calls, not just the first call. And then you have your recruiters that have those 10 to 15 minute calls, and they're not closing drivers. Right, it's that sweet spot, and I'm not going to say it's 7 to 8 minutes, but it's the middle of the 7 to 8 minute time frame that you're actually uncovering the motives of the drivers and aligning exactly what you have to what they want. I took a call yesterday, and we recruited a driver, and she was a student driver, and she didn't ask enough questions, right? But we did get her scheduled, we did get her application, all that good stuff. But I truly knew when I hung up that she was bought in verbally, but it was more of a counterfeit commitment. I don't know that she'll stay long, right? And it was a shorter call. I mean, so I kind of went all over the place with that, but I believe there's 3 buckets of time calls.
Well,
Go ahead.
and I was going to add on to that. It was kind of what Kyle was saying of, if you look at your recruiter that's bringing in a lot of hires, but they're not staying long, look at the total cost per acquisition of those drivers and onboarding and advertising costs. And then, are they even paying for themselves? Those don't sound like profitable hires. How much freight did they haul before they left? Like, that's a situation where I think a lot of recruiters are rewarded by the hire and not necessarily on the retention. And that sounds like there might be a misalignment in incentive there.
Yeah, as you listen to the calls, that's definitely something you want to do as a leader, but you have to measure retention by recruiter. And you're going to have people say, depending on who you're talking to, is, hey, look, once I've recruited them, I'm done. No, you're not. Retention starts in recruitment. So measure your retention by recruiter, and then go back into that and see how long their calls are, and that might answer your question.
So I have a question, and this is a split question between Julie and McKensie. So we talk about you've talked a lot about the process and all the way we lose leads, and there's kind of this gray area in before it's like the pre-lead phase. They haven't actually filled anything out, but they are aware of our brand. They are seeing our trucks. They're seeing our ads. What ways do we lose drivers in that area where it's like that they're not reaching out to us, but we are basically making sure they never reach out to us? And I'd like to hear Julie's take on that, just because Julie's like the Serena Williams of marketing. So, and she likes sports references too.
I am very into the sports, all of them.
So go ahead. Well, we're starting with McKensie. McKensie, what?
Yeah.
I know you did a whole presentation on this idea, so I'd like to hear what you think.
Yes. So my thought process behind that pre-lead stage was, these are drivers that could have been leads. They would have filled out a short form or made a phone call if it weren't for something that we did that stopped them from doing it. And that could be as simple as our trucks were dirty when they were driving down the road. And so this driver said, hey, I want to go apply for XYZ trucking. And then they see that truck that's just filthy and nasty. And now they're like, never mind, that's not the kind of fleet that I want to drive for. And it's something so simple, but yet our failure to keep up a clean truck or put good ads out on the internet is something that kept that lead from potentially getting into our ATS versus not.
Yeah.
Julie, what do you have? And maybe
Well, I'm gonna use it
more towards your marketing expertise on this one.
Well, this is a little bit, I'll say it's about marketing expertise, but to use a Nick Reed phrase, it's going to sound like I'm reaching over my shoulder to scratch my butt. But Kyle on that one. So I think the biggest thing is that you're not investing in a training program, which doesn't sound like a marketing thing, but it absolutely is, because there is nothing more fun to videotape and post on TikTok and Facebook and Instagram than a driver doing something really stupid. And that becomes your social media presence. So all these people out there like, how do you respond to comments? How do you do this? They're not following your page. They're looking at the hashtag your fleet driver does a very stupid thing, but probably said less politely than that, as they're backing over a fire hydrant than trying to get off it and running and their wheels fall off. That was an actual video that one of the drivers sent me. So that becomes a part of your digital presence now. So when you're thinking about marketing and engaging, like, can you comment on those? Can you post counteracting videos? How you train your drivers ends up being content.
Emily, do you have any, because I know you have a lot of thoughts on the entire process and you really oversee you are really into the whole process design. What within process design where do you see fleets making the biggest mistakes?
Making it hard for communication in any way, shape, or form. So whether it's the call system, the process, they have to apply and put 10 years of history in all at once, especially if you're using a corporate applicant tracking system for drivers, that could be a barrier because it's not what they're used to. And assuming it's a one size fits all. So I think you have to look at your process. Scott mentioned earlier around, if you're hiring, for, the apprentice program or a training program through senior, like there's different things that you have to build into your process. And if you try to put everything and everyone through the same step, I think that as much as you can customize but still be efficient is really the way to win people over.
We have time for just a few more questions. So if you guys have any more questions you want to send in, please send them in. I will say, I meant to say this earlier, this is one great insight that I received this year, and it actually came from our other show, Yard Jockeys, but it's appropriate for what we were discussing about the differences in generations when it comes to drivers. One thing that we came across was that the whole idea of an open door policy. So we say, listen, we have an open door policy at our fleet. You have a problem with anything, you can come in here and talk to me face to face. That's not appealing to the newer generation who all their dates on apps where all they had to do is swipe right, swipe left. They could build they could basically build an entire family and network of friends without ever leaving the couch. So if you want to appeal to the younger generation, you need to find ways for them to communicate in the ways that are comfortable and feel safe for them, which is not the march into the office and let's have a face-to-face conversation.
David, let me touch on that. If you're saying that, so everybody on the call, carriers, if you're saying we have an open door policy, that means you don't have an open door policy, right? It's not a big deal, right? It's almost like saying if your recruiters are saying we treat you like family, not a number, then you don't. I mean, that's 1983 recruiting, right?
Yeah,
it really is.
All right. I appreciate everybody that came to this webinar. I think for this one, we're going to make the Q&A available for everybody since we had such a good time. And if you have any ideas for season 3 or specific things you want to see, please reach out to me. Let me know at davidarsenal@randallreilly.com. It's somewhere around my head. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for all the questions. Thank you for all the views on YouTube. Thank you to the guests for showing up. And with that, I think we're going to end it right here. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.